Welcome to the channel. In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Governor Ratcliffe from Disney's Pocahontas. Ratcliffe bears some semblance with other iconic Disney villains in the sense that deep down, he is the opposite of who he is meant to represent at face value. Just like Gaston was the true beast, and just like Frollo was the true monster, Ratcliffe in this story was the true savage instead of the tribesfolk, with his quest for gold bringing out his evil qualities. Due to unfortunate circumstances, Ratcliffe is a man caught between a rock and a hard place. At the start of the film, he is leading a vessel of men sailing for a new world, for glory, God, and gold, and the Virginia Company. As someone from the upper class of society in the 19th century, Ratcliffe enjoys a higher than usual level of wealth and prestige. We're not told much of his backstory, except for the details he reveals about his life back in England. His reputation is something akin to excrement, given that Wiggins describes him as a social climber who has failed at every other endeavor. Ratcliffe himself mentions that he's never been a popular man and gripes against the people who backstabbed him. His current voyage represents his last chance for glory, in the hope that his acquisition of heaps of gold would grant him favor with the king and improve his social standing. This search for gold was itself inspired by the Spanish acquisitions, by the fabled gold of Cortez and the jewels of Pizarro. In his musings, we see that Ratcliffe is somewhat delusional in his inflated opinion of himself. He envisions himself as already successful from his voyage, with King James making him a lord and building a shrine to honor him. He even goes so far as to imagine himself sitting in the king's throne. On the outset, Ratcliffe has somewhat of a dominating presence, simply by virtue of his class as a governor. If that wasn't enough, he is a large and burly man with a deep commanding voice to match. For most of the film, he is dressed in purple, a color that is meant to symbolize royalty in olden times. At the early stages of the story, he has the respect of the crew, although that respect doesn't go both ways, as we see when Ratcliffe labels them as witless peasants who are just there to dig up his gold. It's one thing to be rich, it's a lot less honorable when it's done off the backs of people whom you look down upon. But as bad as this mentality is, Ratcliffe is simply perpetuating a social injustice that is a characteristic of his era. He sits back while letting his men do all the hard labor, saying that he would like to help, but has to excuse himself due to a crick in his spine. We can give him the benefit of doubt here, as it may be very well true that he has a bad back. But Ratcliffe makes the situation worse and dampens the morale of his men by the careless flaunting of his food. From John Smith's conversation with the raccoon, it appears that their voyage has taken 4 months, and the crew have been living on a diet of nothing but hardtack biscuits and gruel. Ratcliffe, however, appears to still be a well-fed man, with meat and wine present in his quarters. In a time when his men are griping over the lack of food, Ratcliffe is seen chomping on a drumstick of meat in the presence of his malnourished men. If that wasn't bad enough, he doesn't even finish it before haphazardly disposing of it by throwing it to his dog. The fact that Ratcliffe can be capable of such reckless behavior speaks to either his absolute disregard for the plight of others or the magnitude of his social ignorance for those below him. When the men gripe over the unfairness of their situation, being overworked and starved, he dismisses their complaints by telling them that they are serving king and country. It's a noble consolation, but in reality he is only thinking of himself. While Ratcliffe is in command of the crew, ultimately they respect and admire John Smith more as a leader, which leads to some insecurity on his part. And although he doesn't pick up the shovel to dig, Ratcliffe is quick to wield the musket in combat as it gives him a sense of masculinity. When he chides Thomas for his inexperience, he tells him that a man is not a man unless he knows how to shoot. As one might expect of someone of his class, Ratcliffe is a prideful individual, most notably seen when he claims ownership of the land simply because he has stepped foot on it, without giving any care or thought to its current occupants who were there before him. Towards the end, when his authority was challenged, he blatantly declares again that the land is his, and that he makes the laws here. Ratcliffe's motives are completely selfish, as we see in his song when he keeps repeating the word mine. At the start, he refers to the word mine as the action of extracting gold from the earth. But by midway into the song, when the word mine is used, it is no longer the verb, but used as an affirmation that all of the gold is his and his only. In contrast, John Smith appears to have some noble intention in helping the tribes advance as a civilization by sharing knowledge, but for Ratcliffe, no such motivation is present. The plot thickens when Ratcliffe discovers that there is no gold to be found in the land, and that he has brought his men halfway around the world for nothing. The right thing to do would to be own up to the mistake, but perhaps Ratcliffe is afraid that his men may stage a mutiny in light of this news. In response, Ratcliffe compounds his mistake and adds error to error. Maybe it is delusional or denial, but somehow Ratcliffe convinces himself that the reason they haven't found any gold is because the tribe people are secretly hoarding it. This conclusion is mistakenly derived from the tribe people's attack on his men, and that this attack was their way of defending their treasure. But Ratcliffe misses the obvious point that his assistant brings up, that the tribes were only provoked because they were the ones who invaded their land, dug up their ground, and cut down their trees. Ratcliffe doesn't realize this simple truth, as again, in his entitled and prideful view, the land is his simply because he has claimed it. As a result, the tribe people's reasonable act of self-defense is seen as an act of aggression. In all this, we must not forget an important element, and that is the fact that this voyage is Ratcliffe's last chance for glory. Should he return empty-handed, he would have to face the embarrassment from his peers, if he even survives the trip back in the first place. This mounting pressure, combined with the aforementioned sense of entitlement, causes Ratcliffe to become deluded. But he is largely a victim of his own pessimistic thinking. Sure, he would have to return to England with his head between his tail, but that is far better than risking his life and the lives of his men in an all-out war with the tribes. The men may despise him, but it's unlikely that they will actually kill him for the fruitless journey. Ratcliffe needs only to appeal to John Smith, who has the men's respect and admiration. It's more likely that John would be grateful to Ratcliffe if he were to just leave peacefully, and in return, he would convince the men to keep him unharmed. And even if he succeeds in defeating the tribe people, Ratcliffe would eventually have to come up with another excuse for the absence of the gold. Either way, the best outcome for him would be to cut his losses and salvage the situation before he descends into further deception. There is a final element that accounts for Ratcliffe's swiftness in accusing the tribespeople, namely his prejudice. In his song at the end, he sings a line which states, "They don't look like you or me, therefore they must be evil." Due to his biased thinking, he is quick to label them as the source of all his problems. He has no qualms with attacking them, now using the reason of saving John as an excuse. This prejudice leads to his most evil act, breaking the peace and attempting to shoot an unarmed man, one who meant him no harm. The tribe's head was already convinced by Pocahontas to spare John and to stand down. This was Ratcliffe's chance to put a stop to his mistake and to prevent himself from spiraling further. But sadly, his greed, his pride, and his prejudice all came to a head and resulted in his final rash decision, one that proves that true savagery is found not in a lack of civilization, but in a lack of morality. So what do you think of Governor Ratcliffe from Pocahontas, folks? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and take care.